Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku had the Omnitrix Part 3. Also heads up that I'm going to take a break for about a week and a half. I have some personal things happening, so I need to take a break for a bit. So, sorry I have. Last time on the What If, the USJ attack happened, and during the attack, Izuku was messed up, but he was able to hold his own and survive. But when the attack was done, the Omnitrix was shown to the world once again, and unknown to the heroes and villains, there is now new eyes that will keep their eyes on Izuku. And now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. So after the attack, Aizawa gave the class a couple of days off, since he wanted to give them time to rest. And during those couple of days, Izuku was able to get fully healed with the help of Recovery Girl. And for some reason, those 2 nights, Izuku kept getting the feeling that something was watching him. But every time he turned the lights on to see what it was, he found nothing. So now he skipped to when the break was done. And after the bell rang, Aizawa announced to the class that the UA Sports Festival will be in about 2 weeks. And hearing this, the class asked if they should even have the Sports Festival, since they were just attacked. But hearing this, Aizawa told them that if they didn't hold the festival, it would give the message that they could be stopped after one attack. So it's vital for them to have this festival. And hearing this, the class just accepts this. So now we jump to that night, and while Izuku had his eyes closed about to fall asleep, he felt something touch his wrist holding the Omnitrix. So he quickly opened his eyes and he moved the Omnitrix away. And he quickly turned on his light. And when the light was on, he was able to see a small creature, smaller than his hand. And seeing this, Izuku asked, what was it and what was it doing there? And the small gray creature responds by saying it's a Galvan by the name of Asmus, and he's the creator of the Omnitrix. And he ends his introduction by saying he's come to take his creation back. And hearing this, Izuku asked why, and Asmus told him that he was never meant to be used as a weapon, and it was meant to create peace between races in another universe. And hearing this, Izuku asked the obvious question, what does Asmus mean by another universe? Then Asmus sighs and he explains in more words, but to keep it short, he sent out the Omnitrix to a great hero by the name of Max Tennyson, but before he was able to reach the planet, it got sucked into a wormhole. Then his universe was attacked by a dictator by the name of Vilgax, and he is currently on the run, and he was able to track the Omnitrix because whenever Izuku got a new alien, he created a signal which Asmus was able to track to this world, and he's come to take it back since there's no reason to have it, and he's come to take it back since he doesn't want another one of his creations to be used as a weapon. Then Asmus jumped onto Izuku's wrist, and he went to go disable the Omnitrix, but Izuku was able to react in time, and he turned himself into goop. Then he engulfed Asmus into his body, and he put him into a glass jar, and after around 10 minutes, Izuku turned back to normal. Then Izuku pleaded for Asmus not to take it, saying that he's not using it to cause harm to innocent people, and he's even learning how to become a hero. But Asmus wasn't hearing it, so Izuku then remembered the sports festival, and he told Asmus that if he was able to make it to first place in the sports festival, he would be able to keep the Omnitrix. And hearing this, Asmus asked why he should even accept this bet, since he has nothing to prove. But Izuku just shook his head and said that if he agreed to this, then he would let him out of the jar. And he let Asmus take the Omnitrix willingly. And after a couple of minutes of thinking, he just sighs, and he tells Izuku he has a deal. And after Izuku lifted up the jar, Asmus jumped out the window. So now we skip 2 weeks, and during this time, Izuku practiced using all of his aliens, since he doesn't know what events were about to take place. So it's time for the UA Sports Fest, and Class 1A was in the waiting room before it began. And the talk between Todoroki and Izuku doesn't happen, since Izuku doesn't have one for all. And when the festival was about to begin, Ida walks into the room and he leads Class 1A into the stadium. And when the event started, it was revealed that the main examiner was Midnight. And when she was done talking about the first event, everyone lined up. And when everyone was prepared, Midnight began to count down. And when the countdown ended, the obstacle race began. And when the countdown reaches 0, Izuku slammed on fast track. But when the flash of green light was gone, Izuku was buzz shocked. So Izuku flew into the air and he flew over the group of students. And the same thing happens with Todoroki, so he froze the ground in the hallway. So he froze the ground, freezing many of the racers in place. But since Izuku was in the air, he was able to avoid this attack. And with this, Izuku was in the race somewhere in the front, but he was still chasing after Todoroki. And after some time, the group comes across robots from the entrance exam, which when Izuku got close to one, Izuku went into the robot and he gained control of it, and he even powered it up so it can go faster. And the reason he did this was because he wanted to save as much energy as he could, while still going as fast as he could. And after a couple of minutes, multiple zero-pointers get released. And when Todoroki got to the first one, he froze the robot's leg while it was off balance, and it made it fall. But when it fell on multiple people, with it landing on Kirishima, Tetsu, and Izuku in his robot suit. But right before Izuku got crushed, Izuku was able to transfer himself from the old robot to the zero-pointer. Then he quickly shot himself out of the zero-pointer's body, and he continued to follow Todoroki, with Bakugo right behind the two. And after Izuku was able to do this, his Omnitrix began to time out. And after a couple of seconds, Izuku got engulfed in a green light, and he got turned back to normal. But even though he was back to normal, Izuku kept going, and after a couple of minutes, the 3 made it to the valley, and since Izuku was human again, he had to climb the rope slowly, while the other 2 were able to get past the valley easily. So they left Izuku behind, and by the time Izuku was able to get to the other side of the valley, the 2 were around 10 meters away from Izuku. So seeing this, he began to try to think of a plan, and after a minute or two, the Omnitrix lights up again. So Izuku then went for Astrodactyl, and when the flash of light was gone, he was Aerodactyl. So Izuku then shot out his wings and he flew to the two as fast as he could. And when he was somewhat close to the two, Izuku shot out green energy from his wrist, and he created a whip on each arm, and he wrapped it around both of their legs. And when they were wrapped tightly, Izuku pulled back his arms, and he flung them back, with Bakugo being flung the farthest around 10 feet, and Todoroki being forcibly tripped, which made Todoroki faceplant. But before he could land on a mine, Todoroki froze the ground underneath him. But even though these two were flung, they quickly adjust themselves, and Todoroki began to run again, and Bakugo began to catch up to him. But this time, Izuku was able to catch up with them, so now they are all neck and neck, and after a minute, they were coming up at the end of the minefield. And seeing this as his last chance, Izuku opened his mouth and he shot out an energy beam at all the mines at the end of the course, which all exploded into one giant explosion, which blew the three off course, launching them around 10 feet back. But since Izuku was ready for this, Izuku was able to quickly recover and he continued to fly. And after a couple of seconds, the other two recovered and they began to run again. And eventually the three make it back to the stadium, and the first person to make it back was Izuku, with Bakugo getting second and Todoroki getting third. So now we skip to when everyone makes it back, and by this point Izuku is back to his human form. And when they get back, they are told about what the next phase is, which is the cavalry battle. And when Midnight is done explaining the rules, she shows the points everyone has, and it's revealed that Izuku gets the 1 million point headband. Then they are given 50 minutes to find the team for the cavalry battle, and Izuku, with him having the highest headband, had a hard time finding people to team up with, but eventually he was able to find Ida and Ochako, and he asked if they would be on his team, and Ochako accepts the deal while Ida says no, since he wants to try to beat Izuku. And then he walks over to Todoroki, and he joined his team. So now we skip to when the cavalry battle begins, and the teams will be the same as in the canon, and Izuku and his team have the same gear as in the canon as well. So when the cavalry battle actually starts, many teams go after Izuku, and since he only has enough time for one transformation, Izuku decided to only use the omnitrix if he needed to. So Izuku's group started the match by running away from people that posed an actual threat to them. And after a couple of minutes, someone uses their quirk to make the ground under them turn into quicksand. So they use the hover boots and jetpack Izuku had on his back to fly into the sky. And when around 5 minutes have passed, Izuku finally decides to transform, and he gives his team a heads up before he tries to transform into Water Hazard. And when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was Water Hazard, and he uses water propulsion to help him and his team move faster, and he uses hydrokinesis to create walls of boiling water, which allows less teams to go after them. And he also used this to his advantage because whenever they were able to get a headband, they would use the wall to separate themselves from the enemy. And at around the end of the match, Team Todoroki started to run at them, and when they got close, Todoroki froze the water solid, trapping Izuku and his team in a circle of ice. And knowing that they need to escape, Izuku shouted to Ochako, telling her to make them weightless. And when she did, he pointed his hands to the ground, then shot out water at room temperature, and he shot so much water that it pushed them up. And when they were able to get above the ice, Ochako gives them weight again. Then the group jumps down from the ice, and they try to run away, while Izuku shot out water at Team Todoroki, which made Kaminari useless, since he wouldn't be able to use his quirk without injuring his teammates more than usual. But when there was around a minute left, Ida decides to go all out, so he told his team to hold on, and he started to fire up his engines as hot as he could, and he used his reciprocal burst to go faster than Team Izuku could react, and he was able to get the 1 million headband. And since Team Izuku had not focused on getting headbands, they were in the top 7, so they needed to get headbands quickly. So Izuku told his group to run at Team Todoroki, and when they started to run, Todoroki tried to launch a wave of ice, but before the ice hit, they would move out of the way, with Izuku using his water to propel them, and Tokoyami using Dark Shadow to push them. But right after a couple of attacks, the Omnitrix began to flash red, and after a couple of seconds, Izuku turned back to normal. But even though Izuku was human again, he was able to, after 30 seconds, grab a headband off of Todoroki's neck, which he hoped was the 1 million headband. But when he grabbed it and looked at it, it wasn't it. And even with this new headband, they didn't have enough points to pass, so Izuku's team went for one last charge. And right before it was time, they clashed. But Izuku wasn't able to grab anything, and Bakugo flew at the two, and he tried to reach them. But before he could, time ended. And at first, Izuku was upset with himself, since he made a deal with Azimuth, and he would lose the Omnitrix. But before he could do anything, Tokoyami told him to look at the scoreboard. And when he looked, Izuku's team was in 4th place, which was just low enough to make them pass. Then after everything was put away, it was time for lunch. But in this, Izuku, instead of having a meeting with Todoroki, he had a meeting with Azimuth, who confronted him in the hallway when he was by himself, and he told Izuku that he was impressed, since he had expected someone like him to be out first, but he tells him he's still planning on taking the Omnitrix if he fails. Izuku then nodded, and the two went their separate ways. So now we jump to when lunch was over. All the first years were brought to the middle of the stadium, and they were told that they will be doing 1v1s. And when the matchups were revealed, Ojiro and someone from Class 1A resigned, since they don't feel like they deserve to be doing this. So they get replaced with 2 people who were in 5th place in the cavalry battle. Then everyone went to the bleachers to watch, while Izuku and Shinso go to the waiting rooms to prepare for their fight, since the Mentos had to create the arena. And while Izuku was preparing himself, himself, Ojiro went into Izuku's waiting room, and he told Izuku about Shinso's quirk, and how if you respond to his questions, he will be hypnotized. And by the time Ojiro was done explaining, the match was about to begin. So Ojiro quickly left and he went to the stand, while Izuku walked to the arena. And when Izuku and Shinso got there, the countdown for the match began. And when midnight got to 0, the match began. And when it did, Izuku slammed his watch on Snarrow. And when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was Spider Monkey instead. But even though Izuku was the wrong alien, Izuku just charged at Shinso. And while he was running, Shinso began to tell Izuku that he was lucky for getting such a great quirk. But even though Izuku wanted to talk, he kept his mouth shut, and he used his super strength and webbing to overpower Shinso. And after some time, he was able to throw Shinso out of the arena, making Izuku the winner of the match. So now he's get past all of the matches, and all of the results will be the same as in the canon. But before the match against Todoroki, Izuku ran into Endeavor, and he tells Izuku to try his best since he's a good challenge for Todoroki. Then he tells him to make sure he uses his fire side. But hearing this, Izuku just walked off, and he began to wonder why Todoroki isn't going all out. So now we skip to when the match was about to begin, and when Todoroki and Izuku get to the arena, the match begins. And when it did, Todoroki fired an ice attack at Izuku. But seeing this, Izuku pressed the button on the omnitrix, and right before he got hit, he slammed his hand on Chroma Stone. And when the flash of light was gone, he was Chroma Stone. He then shot out a beam of energy just strong enough to stop the ice. Then Izuku jumped over it, and he began to run at Todoroki, who then fired ice attack after ice attack. And Izuku in response shoots out energy beams just strong enough to break the ice. And after some time, Izuku was able to get to Todoroki, and he tried to throw him out of the arena, but in the process, Todoroki froze parts of his arms. And while Todoroki was in the air about to hit the ground, he was able to touch the arena just in time. And with that piece of contact, he was able to create a wall of ice, which blocked Todoroki from hitting the outside. And since Todoroki didn't hit the outside, he was technically still in. Then Izuku noticed the ice that was covering around half of Todoroki's body, and Izuku shouts, "Why are you trembling, Todoroki? Why aren't you actually trying?" Todoroki then says it's none of his business, and to just continue the fight. But Izuku shouts saying it is his business since he hasn't tried this whole time, but he still wants to win. Then Todoroki shouts to him to shut up, but Izuku continues, and eventually he shouts that it's your power, not his. Then Todoroki starts to reflect about everything, and after a couple of seconds, Todoroki's side starts to be engulfed in flames, and they decide to go for one final clash. So then Izuku ran to the other side of the arena, and he prepared himself to use the most of his energy, and he surrounded himself with energy, and Todoroki began to engulf himself in fire and ice. And when the two were ready, Izuku charged at Todoroki, and when Todoroki saw this, he launched a wave of ice just big enough to cover a good portion of the stadium. But before it hit Izuku aimed his hands at the ice, and he jumped as high as he could, and right before he began to fall, he began to fly as fast as he could, and he began to fire his energy beams from his hands to try to stop the ice, and he was just barely able to get to the top of the ice just in time. Izuku then slid down the ice towards Todoroki, and seeing this, Todoroki launched a wave of flames, and seeing this, Izuku did nothing, and he just kept going as fast as he could, and when the flames hit him head on, it did nothing, and it just made it so Todoroki couldn't find Izuku. And when the smoke cleared, Izuku was right in front of Todoroki, so he aimed his hands at him, and he shot 2 energy beams at Todoroki's chest, just strong enough to hurt without actually injuring him, which made Todoroki fall to the floor in pain. And seeing this, Izuku picked up Todoroki, and when he did this, ice began to form on his hands again. But before it got too bad, Izuku threw Todoroki as hard as he could, and this time he made sure he didn't touch anything. So this time, Todoroki hit the outside of the arena, making Izuku the winner of the match. So now we skip a couple of matches, so now it's the final match with Izuku against Bakugo. And when they both got to the arena, the match began. And when it did, Bakugo charged at Izuku using his explosions to propel him. And seeing this, Izuku slammed his hand on the omnitrix on fast track. And when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was Snarrow. And when the flash of light was gone, he immediately got the bandages on his arm, and he wrapped Bakugo with his arms tied to his sides. And seeing this, Bakugo aimed one of his hands towards Izuku, and he aimed the other one behind himself. Then he began to fire explosions, making him spin, and in the process, I made Izuku spin. And when Izuku tried to unwrap himself, Bakugo grabbed onto one of Izuku's bandages, and he put it into his mouth, and he fired 2 explosions toward the ground, launching him up, and in the process, he launched Izuku into the air. He then let go of Izuku, and he tried to throw him out, and after that, he began to fire, allowing him to fly. But before Izuku fell out, Izuku stretched out his arms again, and he wrapped himself around Bakugo's legs, and he swung back into the arena, and in the process, he flew Bakugo a couple of feet, but when he hit the ground, he was still in the arena. Then Bakugo got up, and he began to run at Izuku, and seeing this, Izuku ran straight at him as well. And when the two collided, Bakugo tried to fire an explosion at Izuku, but before it could land, Izuku moved his bandages out of the way, just far enough to not get hit. Then Izuku formed back to normal, and he began to punch Bakugo. And this happened for a couple of minutes, where Izuku was able to hit Bakugo without being hit himself. But after a couple of punches, Bakugo looked like he went for a right punch, so Izuku moved his right side to his left side, and before he could react, Bakugo moved his left hand, and he exploded most of Izuku's body. So Izuku then backed up, and he checked the damage he just took, which was, he was burned, but he was slowly regenerating. And before Izuku could react, Bakugo flew at Izuku, and he began to spin. And before he got to Izuku, he used his special move, Howitzer Impact, which which covered Izuku's side of the arena with a giant explosion, which hit Izuku head on. And when the explosion was gone, everyone tried to find Izuku in the smoke. And unknown to everyone, Izuku was able to protect himself at the last second by using his fingers to create a wall, which protected him mostly, but most of his sides were burned off. And while he was in the smoke, Izuku flattened himself and he began to slither himself towards Bakugo. And before he could react, Izuku wrapped both of his arms around Bakugo. And since Bakugo used his special move, his wrists were aching in pain, so he couldn't fire another explosion. Izuku then chucked Bakugo out of the arena. And when he hit the ground, Izuku was dubbed the winner of the match. And after a couple of minutes, the award ceremony took place. And after that, when everyone was back in their classrooms, Aizawa announced that they will be given a couple of days to rest. So now we skip to that night, and when Izuku was about to go to sleep, he heard something knock on his window. And when he looked at it, he saw Asmus. So he opened his window, and when Asmus walked into the room, he told Izuku that he's here to congratulate Izuku for getting first place in the sports festival. And he told Izuku that even if he got first place, he was thinking about still taking the omnitrix. Since he doesn't care if he's efficient with it, he still feared that it could be used to harm people. But while he was watching, he saw the fight between him and Todoroki, and that's when he decided that he's worthy to have it, since he got to see what kind of person Izuku was. So he then told Izuku that the omnitrix is officially his. He then goes to leave, but before he does, he gives Izuku a phone number, which he can use to contact him, and he tells Izuku to meet him in the nearby woods the next day. And when he was done talking, Asmus jumps through the window. So now we skip to the next day, and when Izuku was ready, he went into the nearby woods, and after some time, he found a shack that seemed to not have been touched in decades. And when he went to knock on the door, after a couple of minutes, the door slid open, and when it did, Asmus was standing in front of Izuku, and he gestured him inside. And when Izuku walked in, he was led to a table, and when Izuku sat down, Asmus told Izuku that he hasn't even scratched the surface of the omnitrix potential. So he then told Izuku to stick out his arm, and when he did, Asmus walked over to it, and he told Izuku to stay still. He began to move the dial, and after a couple of twists, the omnitrix grew green, and then it did it again, and after some more twisting, it did it again. And then Asmus went to his side of the table, and he told Izuku that he has unlocked 3 more transformations, and the 3 transformations Asmus gave him that Izuku named was Lodestar, an alien with the ability of magnetism. The second alien was an alien with the power of gases that Izuku named Gutrot. And finally, Izuku got another electric alien that goes by the name Feedback. And shortly after that, Asmus told Izuku to leave, and to only come back if he really needs to, or unless he calls him. Then for the rest of the break, Izuku practiced using his new alien. And since he got new aliens, Izuku now has a 7 out of 15 chance to get the wrong alien. So now we skip to when it's the first day back to UA. And when class started, Aizawa announced that they will be coming up with hero names. Then Midnight walked into the room to help them, and the name Izuku chose was the Omni hero, Izuku, since Izuku wasn't called Deku, and I really couldn't come up with a cool name for him. Then after they all came up with their names, Aizawa showed on the board the amount of pros that picked them for the internships, with Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki getting the most. And since Izuku doesn't have one for all, he doesn't go to Gran Torino. Instead, he goes to Endeavor, since Endeavor saw potential in Izuku, and he sees Izuku as a good way to test Todoroki and make him better. So now we skip a couple of days, and it's time for the internships to begin. But before they all leave, Izuku and Ochako walk to Ida, and they tell him that they are his friend, and that he could tell them anything. Ida then looks at them and he nods. Then he continues to walk to his train, and a couple of hours later, Izuku and Todoroki make it to Endeavor's agency. And after they send into their rooms, they start to train, with Izuku using his new aliens, which made Izuku good at using his new aliens, and that made Todoroki stronger since he had to use both sides in order to even stand a chance against Izuku. And this went on for a couple of days, until one day, Endeavor told Izuku and Todoroki that they will be going on patrol in Hosu, since there has been a person killing heroes that needs to be taken care of. And when they get there, after some time, they see a giant fire in the center of the city. And seeing this, Endeavor told them that they will need to be ready for what's to come. And after a bit of running, the 3 make it to the center of the fighting. And when they get there, Izuku heard the pro hero manual. And hearing this, Izuku began to think, if Ida isn't here, then he must be after the hero killer. So Izuku told Todoroki, and they told Endeavor that they have to fight someone, and they told him to look around the city alleyways when he's done fighting the Nomus. Izuku then slammed his hand on the omnitrix on fast track, and when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was fast tracked. He then picked up Todoroki and they began to run as fast as they could, searching every alleyway for the hero killer or Ida. And after a minute, Izuku found the hero killer standing above Ida about to kill him. And when Izuku saw this, he placed Todoroki at the end of the alleyway, and Izuku ran at Stain. And before he could react, Izuku was able to punch Stain in the face, and when he did, Stain got flung into a nearby building. But even after that, Stain was able to get back up, and seeing this, Izuku went to attack Stain again. But this time, Stain was able to react in time, and he tried to slash Izuku with his sword. But Izuku was able to react, and he was able to avoid the sword. But before he could react, he gets cut from a hidden knife that was in Stain's sleeve, making him bleed. And getting hurt, Izuku stopped for a second. And with that second, Stain was able to kick Izuku away, and he licked the blood that was on his knife. And when he did, Izuku got paralyzed. Then Stain tried to stab Izuku, but before he could, Todoroki launched a wave of flames at Stain, which made him back up. And those two began to fight, with every time Todoroki got cut, he covered the wounds with either flames or ice, so Stain couldn't get his blood. And after around 5 minutes, Izuku was able to get back up. up, and this time he was able to beat up Stain without getting hit, since he knew where Stain's blades were. So after a couple of minutes, Stain got defeated, and when he seemed to be knocked out, Izuku ran around the area and eventually found a rope to tie Stain up with. And when this was all done, Ida asked why did they do that. This was his fight, but Izuku and Todoroki told him that he was their friend, so they would do anything to help him. Izuku then quickly picked up Ida, and he brought him to where a group of people was, and he told them to call an ambulance. And before he timed out, he did the same thing for the pro hero native, and Izuku brought Todoroki and Stain to a nearby police station, where the two of them explained what just happened. And that's where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.